Into the Cuban Revolution by Connor Ty. America had been highly influential in Cuba since the early 1900s. Much of Cuba's industry was owned by U.S. businesses, and its main export, sugar, was controlled by the USA. In the 1950s, Cuba was being led under the corrupt military dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. However, he supported U.S. interests on the island, so Washington supported him. When it came time for the 1952 election, it became clear that Batista, who had previously been president from 1940 to 1944, would not win the election. He seized power 3 months prior to the voting and canceled the elections outright. What Batista had did was staging a coup d'état. Fidel Castro, a rising political star, would have won a seat in Congress had the 1952 elections taken place and not been stopped by Batista. Castro immediately began plotting Batista's downfall. July 26, 1953, Castro made his move. He wanted to protest against Batista, but in a way so he could gain power and be noticed. He wanted to revolt. Castro picked the isolated Moncada barracks as his target to gain weapons and to make a statement to Batista. The compound was attacked at dawn by 138 men. Fidel and his men tried to use the element of surprise to make up for the lack of men and weapons. The attack was chaotic almost from the start, and the rebels were routed after a firefight that had lasted a few hours. Many of Fidel's men were captured. 19 federal soldiers were killed. The federal soldiers remaining took out their anger on captured rebels, shooting most of them, but Fidel and Raul Castro escaped, but were later captured by Batista and his men. As the July 26 movement gained power in the mountains, other rebel groups took up the fight and helped Castro. In the cities, rebels carried out hit-and-run attacks and nearly succeeded in assassinating Batista. In the summer of 1958, Batista sent a large bunch of his army out in the mountains to flush out Castro and his men. This did not work, and Castro's men either killed Batista's or Batista's men switched sides and deserted the mission. Batista and his close men realized Castro would soon win, so they took what they could and fled. Cienfuegos and Guevara, some of Castro's most trusted men, entered Havana January 2, 1959, and disarmed the remaining military installations. Castro made his way into Havana slowly, pausing in every town, city, and village along the way to give a speech to the cheering crowds, finally entering Havana on January 9, 1959. The Castro brothers quickly started to abuse the power they had, sweeping away all the remains of Batista's army. Raul Castro and Guevara were put in charge of gathering all of Batista's men that had helped torture and try to bring the Castros to trial. Castro initially positioned himself as a nationalist. He soon gravitated toward communism and openly courted the leaders of the Soviet Union. This caused many difficult problems in different places, such as Chile, Uruguay, and a conflict with the U.S. and Cuba. In 2008, Fidel Castro stepped down from presidency of Cuba and installed his brother Raul instead. During the next 5 years, the government loosened its policy on foreign travel. The U.S. also began to engage Cuba under the direction of President Barack Obama, and by 2015 announced that the long-standing embargo would gradually be loosened. The announcement resulted in a great amount of travel from the U.S. to Cuba and more cultural exchanges between the two nations. Cuba is now led by Miguel Díaz-Canel, who is likely to seat against Raul Castro for first secretary of the Communist Party in 2021. Thank you for listening to this amazing world history presentation.